and do it cost effectively. And it's an on-demand model where they can upload a piece of the binary. We never have to touch the source. That's a whole new, interesting business model around an age-old problem that hasn't been fully addressed. And then as soon as we change that, another funny aside, so I said to these guys, I had to think about this for a while, came back and said, I think I figured out why you're not getting funded. All right, you got to get off this notion that we're a tool. You should be a service. And as a service, I think you're incredibly fundable. And in fact, I'll throw money into it, and I'll help you get other funding, and. And they sat there and they looked at me and they said, but we don't want to be a services company. I said, you're kidding me, right? Why? They said, because, services companies don't exit at as high multiples as software companies. I said, no. That's the old world. This is the new world. And I think, I would argue that, in fact, quality services companies that are scalable, subscription-based, technology-driven, right? So there is a technology that's proprietary and powerful at the core of this service. Those are more valuable companies than enterprise software companies today. So, that company is called Veracode, by the way, today. Veracode.
Yes.
Can people on the panel share any anecdotes, like the worst pitch you ever heard?
You better not say it was mine.
Obviously it wasn't. I'd be dumb if I did.
I'll throw one out there only because it's so remarkable. And
I think that's what she's looking for.
I did not meet with this person, but I did get a very well-written, very well-thought-out pitch on time travel.
Nice.
And it was a Princeton graduate who was pretty notable, and I'm not saying anything about Princeton. And it was a very interesting concept. It would have made a really interesting book. But,
novel, it's fiction.
Yeah.
Huh. I'll just sum up mine with 2 words: caffeinated soap. Yeah, it is. Any other horror stories?
I knew one that wasn't sort of related. I remember it was an internet company with Just Balls or something, where you can order any kind of ball you want. JustBalls.com is some like things probably stretching.
Did they get funded?
I think they did get funding. Yeah, this is the whole internet heyday, so it's a little bit different.
JustBalls.com, everybody.
The URL alone is increasing in value every second.
I think it was this, it was a funded company from public.
Let me interject a quick question. It's a variation on the "are venture capitalists evil?" question. So, you guys come in and dilute the shares, and if you don't like the founders, you kick them out. At the same time, arguably, it's more possible than ever now to start a company without venture capital. You can use open source software and web services. So let me ask all of you, if you were starting a company today, would you and when would you go talk to venture capitalists?
Actually, before we get into that question,
don't ask me, are journalists evil, please?
Sorry, and then I'll pass to one of these guys. So we don't even look at ourselves as a venture capitalist. We look at ourselves as sort of a mesh between an angel / venture or private equity, because we're much more of a hands-on approach. I think a big part of the disenfranchisement with today's venture model is, give the money and the talk about introductions and opening doors, but it doesn't really happen as much as I think the entrepreneurs think it will. And so we try to take a much more active approach as it kind of separates, at least from our philosophy, and sort of going in at an earlier stage. So for what that's worth.
I think it really depends on what type of company you're starting and whether the particular venture capitalist that you approach can help you. So, I'll give you, in the world that I invest in, consumer, internet, mobile, I'll give you, 2 typical examples. One example is if I started another social network or a photo sharing site. I could get it off the ground pretty cheap. If I tweaked it just right and it was viral and it caught on, it could scale pretty fast. And, I'd need some money to buy server space and all that, but, there isn't anything fundamental to the business that really someone else could help me with if I myself were pretty good at tweaking virality and social networking and all that stuff. Another example, a company that we actually funded was a mobile application, a location-based mobile application. Now, technically, these two founders, they were 19 sophomores from Stanford when we first met them. They could build this thing. It looked great. It was beautiful, except that to really get it to the market, they needed carrier adoption. They needed Sprint and Verizon and T-Mobile and Singular AT&T. Now, two 19-year-old kids who dropped out of college walking into the CIO's office of Sprint is not a meeting that they, regular people themselves could get. And they couldn't speak with a great deal of credibility, even though, frankly, they deserved it. And so, that network that a firm like ours had over the last 30 years helped them a lot, and it was essential to them. So my advice to anyone starting up a company and saying, should I take venture, should I not, is, I would be open-minded to it, and I would walk in, and I would, instead of, you have to do a little selling to the VC, but have them sell you on the VC. Ask them, here's, I could just chart out the path. Hey, I could do this by myself. Here's what I do. What difference will you make in this path? How will you change the trajectory of this company? And if they convince you, and you talk to companies that they've worked with before, and those companies say, yeah, they were true to their word. They did make all those introductions that you read about on their website. And I think that is a great way to proceed. And for many companies it is. I mean, if you look at the stars of the NASDAQ today that started off as startups out of people's garages, most of them were venture financed. And it wasn't, just like Dov said, it's not merely the money and the financing, or Mark said this, it's the help. And you should be very clear about what help they'll give you, and you should have them sell you on them.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, but my philosophy is, take as much money as you should, but as little as you can. And so, that becomes, I think, a productive discussion that you can engage with a non-evil VC. Who
it's all of us.
who will basically push you on that and kind of push your thinking on that and sort of really kind of dig into some of your assumptions and your models that say, how much do you really need to do this? Because it's actually in everybody's best interest for you not to take more money than you will really need. And that's very different philosophy than trying to raise money 6-7 years ago for a company. Back then, the prevailing wisdom was take as much as you can whenever you can. And it was wrong, right? A lot of us basically owned a lot less of our company at the end of the day because we took a lot more money. And guess what you do when you have a lot more money? You spend a lot more money, right? I want to talk about evil. Let's talk about, there are evil VCs, just like there are evil people in every industry. I had a very evil blackjack dealer last night. Evil people, right? So, I don't think it's endemic to this industry. But I mean, I also think venture capital is evolving as an industry. And I think that what made, venture capitalists, it's only a 35-year-old industry, by the way, right? It's a pretty young industry. And so while there's some data to look at, I think the story is going to play out over, a much longer period of time. And I think what made VCs great, 30 years ago and 20 years ago, is not, and what made them very successful is not necessarily what's going to make them successful over the next 10 or 20 years. And I think that, we're kind of heading back to basics with VC in a lot of ways. And that's where the specialization comes in, and that's where the notion of, really strong business partnering comes in. And I think the point Patrick made is dead on. If you're fortunate enough to be able to pick your VC, really sort of, do that intentionally in terms of a personality fit, a chemistry fit, sort of the focus of the firm fit, because, it's like any other relationship. You're going to be tied together for a few years, and, hopefully those interests are aligned. But I also think that the VCs, what makes a VC evil, by the way, is that, they're being unfair in terms of the terms, right? They're either being unfair in terms of valuation, and by the way, that's, I'm sure that that's a matter of opinion in most of those situations, right? It's perspective. But, that could be one thing that brands people as unfair. But I think moreover, it's terms that are fundamentally hugely favoring the venture capital firm and really disfavoring the entrepreneur. And at the end of the day, you don't see a lot of that anymore, right? Because good deals have competition, and those terms become a matter of, market, sort of the market sets the value of those terms just like the market sets the price of the deal. And so I think, the firms that kind of got away with that are not going to be the rock star successful firms of the future. And you're going to see a way fewer venture capital firms over the next 10 years than you did over the last 10. And I think a lot of that is how you partner with your entrepreneurs. The key thing also to look at is invest with somebody, invest with a partner in that firm who you have, you can get references on, who will say, I will invest with that firm and with that partner again. Right? Find a partner who has entrepreneurs that are willing to say, if I were to do it all over again, I would want that person around my boardroom table. That tells you everything. It tells you everything you need to know.
Other questions? Yes.
Kind of building on the keynote speech this morning, it took it invested for you. He was talking about the psychology of buying security, or how we perceive security and what we're willing to pay for security. I'd like to flip it around. You guys have seen successful companies, unsuccessful companies, and when you read value propositions for companies coming into the security space, it's either buy our stuff or bad things will happen to you. Buy our stuff because regulations say you should buy our stuff, which sounds boring, but seems to drive a lot of purchasing. Or buy our stuff because they'll make you more efficient and save money, like maybe the managed services model helped, had that kind of value proposition. So what do you see as, and there's the one that you think people really buy for, but the one that they actually end up buying for might be different. So what do you see as sort of the key drivers in the security business for people buying security?
I mean, generically, right? It's, solve a big unsolved problem that's creating pain for a market that has money. Right? Find.
So go to the next level. The big pain is bad things will happen to me because my data will get stolen. Or the big pain is it takes 50 people to keep up with this particular security issue?
Could be all of the above, right? I mean, the beauty of the security space is exactly that, right? It's like the pain never really gets solved, right? So here, what you're able to say is, here's why we're addressing this in a way that makes this more effective, right? And it's either effective from a cost-effective standpoint, it's effective from it takes the company less time. We take the place of 4 different, point products, right? So you can get rid of all those, and by the way, they're costing you money to manage every year, and they're costing you money in maintenance. So there's a number. I don't think it's kind of there's not just one, right? It could be, you can tell that story, in a way that says, you can reduce the amount of time that it takes you to prepare for your audits and meeting your compliance objectives. I mean, there's a whole different range of ways to describe that value.
Okay, the one about buy our stuff or bad things will happen.
That's the toughest one. So I would argue that if someone comes to me and their argument is, there's this problem out there, and it's not going to become mainstream. It's going to be focused on a small group, or a small group will feel it. And people should live in fear of it, and I have the solution. That's a very hard argument, I think. Compliance and an obvious ROI to the person buying it are much easier sales when you look at, when I look at a business. I say, if you can show a demonstrable, I'm cutting your literal financial expenses in an operation, or you're meeting something that you legally have to, regulatory and compliance, which is the big driver these days. The other one, the FUD factor, frankly, is the hardest sell. So I would have to believe that the FUD factor was real and it was going to become a large enough issue overall that it would provide that market, but it's a very hard sale. And I see a lot of businesses, actually, frankly, that are hoping to move FUD, I'll call it that, FUD, from an idea to a compliance requirement, which is an interesting tact, right? But it requires people who are influential, who can stand up and say, let's say in the e-discovery world, where you're seeing a lot of interesting